103B, inward 1.5 pike. Scores. 4 1/2, 5, 5, 3 1/2, 5, 5, 4 1/2. Mike, 101A, forward dive straight. Scores. 5, 6 1/2, 6, 5 1/2, 5 1/2, 4 1/2, 5. Jesse, 103B, forward 1.5 pike. Scores. 5, 4 1/2, 5, 4 1/2, 5, 5, 5 1/2. Noah, 5132D, forward 1.5, 1 twist. Scores. 5 1/2, 5 1/2, 5 1/2, 5 1/2, 6, 4, 5 1/2. Jose, 103C, forward 1.5 tuck. Scores. 5, 5, 4 1/2, 5, 4 1/2 across. Jake, 302C, reverse somersault tuck. Scores. 4, 4 1/2, 4 1/2, 5, 4 1/2, 4, 4 1/2. Brandon, 201A, back dive straight. Scores. 6, 6 1/2, 5 1/2, 5 1/2, 5 1/2, 6, 6. Brendan, 5132D, forward 1.5, 1 twist. Scores. 6, 4, 5 1/2, 5 1/2, 5 1/2. 5, 5. Cole, 105B, forward 2.5 pike. Yes. So 105C. Scores. 5 1/2, 4, 4, 4 1/2, 5, 4 1/2, 4. Travis, 404C, inward, double somersault tuck. Scores. 4, 3 and 1/2, 3 and 1/2, 3, 2 and 1/2, 3, 3 and 1/2. Stetson, 202C, back somersault tuck. Scores. 3, 3 and 1/2, 4, 3, 4, 2, 2 and 1/2. Andrew, 201C, back dive tuck. Scores. 5, 5, 5, 4 and 1/2, 5, 5 and 1/2, 4 and 1/2. Alexander, 301C, reverse dive tuck. Scores. 4, 4 and 1/2, 4, 4, 4, 4 and 1/2, 4. Andre, 304C, reverse double somersault tuck. Scores. 4 and 1/2, 2 and 1/2, 3 and 1/2, 3, 3 across. Dustin White, 302C, reverse somersault tuck. Scores. 5, 5 and 1/2, 5, 5, 5 and 1/2, 5 and 1/2, 5. Judging panel B will be on deck after this dive. Aaron, 5132D, forward 1.5, 1 twist. Scores. 4 and 1/2, 4 and 1/2, 4, 4, 4 and 1/2, 4, 4. Okay, judge.